Hello, my name is Chris Wheeler. Me and my wife Chandra have been coming to the crossing ever since it started. We went to Berg, we went to Batavia, now we're here, and we love it. We've always loved it. It's our church, it's our home. Casey came to me and asked me, hey, we're doing this remembrance service. Would you like to speak? Would you like to talk about your dad, losing your dad? And your initial reaction is no. I don't want to do that. But I knew Casey had, plans, and I knew if she wouldn't ask me if she didn't want me to do it. And I always thought, if it helps one person, that's good. But to talk about my dad, I don't want to make light of anybody that, maybe didn't have a good dad or doesn't have a good, relationship with their dad or whatever. But my relationship with my dad was perfection. Sorry. He was the best. With my son being an equal, he's pretty much my best friend. And it's kind of funny because my hobbies and his hobbies, polar opposites. Like, I hunt, I fish, I hike. He does not hunt, he does not fish. The outdoors are not for him, weren't for him. And they are for me. But just him being the best dad literally in every aspect of my life. As a child, as an adolescent, as a teenager, as a young adult, as a married adult, as a grandpa myself, he was always my dude. The guy that I called, the guy that I talked to. There wasn't a week or days that didn't go by we didn't talk. He lives, him and mom, 5 minutes from my house. But growing up, he was a pastor. He was a senior pastor, so he was my preacher at times. He was my youth pastor at times. And his life was always God's will. If he felt that, his time at a certain church was done and we were going to move, and we always knew that, after dinner or something, if we ever heard the words, hey, my sisters, Heather and Rachel, mom, myself, if we ever heard the words, hey, we're going to have a family meeting, after about the second time we knew, well, we're moving. And we were. And every time we did, I was upset. Didn't understand it. I didn't want to move. All your friends, all your relationships, all the families that you know, all the school that you go to, and you get a little older and you look back and you think, man, God knew what he was doing. We moved to Bethel. That's when I met my wife. We moved to Amelia. That's when Rachel met her husband, and neither one of us wanted to move there. And those moves, my dad listening to God and God's will, changed our lives and our family's lives forever. But growing up, Dad was he was Dad. Did I get in trouble? Yep, I got in trouble. Did I get whippings? Yep, I got whippings. But I also got a lot of hugs. I got a lot of, I'm proud of you. Especially getting older. Just more of that, seeing my family, my kids, my grandkids, his grandkids, his great-grandkids. It was just, it was a special life that I had as a kid. Growing up in the church, it's not always the easiest thing. You see and you hear and you know everything. It's not always pretty. It's not always pretty, but it's reality. Dad never really hid anything from us because he wanted everything to be out in the open. But we always knew that Dad was doing God's will, and that's why we were there. I joke about it now because I've lived so many places, every 4 or 5 years we'd move. I have friends literally all over Southwest Ohio, everywhere. But being his son was special because I got to see him as a leader, as a friend to anybody. People would show up at our door at, any random time, sometimes 2 o'clock in the morning, and our door was never shut. He was always there for anybody and everybody. His example of, I keep saying God's will, but his example of being Christ on earth was kind of second to none, in my opinion. That's just how he lived his life. He never met a stranger. He never met anybody he didn't want to pray with or pray for. He never met anybody that he didn't want to share his love and Jesus' love with them. So you can imagine the profound impact that has when that's my life. For 53 years, he was my example on earth. It was special. But yeah, he supported me in playing sports, soccer, basketball, whatever I wanted to do. He was that guy. Supported my sisters and whatever they wanted to do. And Dad was Dad, but he was a different dad to all three of us, if that makes sense. He knew I was stubborn, so he knew that he couldn't come at me with an iron fist, or I would probably go the other way. So he got his point across. Yeah, he was subtle about it. With Rachel, he knew that, she just needed somebody to talk to, and needed somebody to just give her a hug when she needed it. With Heather, he knew she needed more of like more guidance, more love, a little more tender, and he was that guy. Another aspect of my dad is, in 53 years, I never, ever, ever heard him raise his voice to my mother. Not once. I never heard a cuss word out of his mouth. Never, ever or seen him take a drink of alcohol. Never had it in our house, of course, but him and my mother combined, just incredible examples of how I picture and how I read in the Bible of how Christ would be if he were here. So it was incredible life growing up as Steve Wheeler's son. It was very special. His effect is generational. And, you take it for granted when you're in the moment. But as you get older and you look around, you're like, everybody don't have my dad. And it's very, very special. And incredible memories of, we never missed an Ohio State football game together. We never missed a Bengals game together. If we were at the house and the Reds were on TV. Big sports guy. And we shared all that. And then, growing up, going on vacations, and outdoors wasn't his thing, and he would take us camping. So it was just a special childhood, and what he led by example and what his word said generationally has just kept going, and will continue to go, because that's how we all live. We live our life. I don't want to say according to Dad, according to Steve, but we're according to Christ, because that's what he showed us. A few years ago, he had gotten prostate cancer, and that really didn't worry me, because so many people now that it's kind of a normal thing with guys. There's a high percentage that that can happen. Didn't really worry him. Worried Mom, worried the girls, but as time went on, it was like, the doctor's like, this is fine, you're good, blah, blah, blah. And that was correct. It wasn't a big deal, but every time you hear the C word, it's like, what's going on? And Dad was back home, and he had felt the call to be a senior pastor again, because he was not allowed to retire because he's a minister. And every time my mom would question it, he would say, take it up with God. So that was his way out of it, and that was his way to take another church. And he felt called, and he took another church in West Virginia, away from all of us. Again, God's will. I don't know what Dad, Grandpa, I don't know who walks away from the family that he has, which he didn't walk away, but I don't know who leaves to go lead another church unless he felt led by God. And we all knew. Nobody was bitter. Nobody was upset or anything. We understood, and we went back and forth to West Virginia, and they came home a million times as my kids went through high school and graduated high school, and they never missed a thing. And then he decided to retire again, and he was home maybe 6 months and started having some complications and went to the doctor, and the C word popped up again, and that it was in his right hip. No connection to the prostate cancer, just something else. And with the new drugs and the new therapies and the new everything else, they thought we've got this under control, and they did. It was good. It was fine. The spot actually went away with the medicine they gave him, the medication they gave him, and we were like, okay, because when you hear bone cancer, you're like, uh-oh. But once again, he got through that, and everything was good. And then just a short time in May, you could tell he was starting to feel, a little slow, a little tired. First time ever, he was like, hey, can you mow the yard? I'm like, absolutely, no problem. And so then needed to see his doctors again. His doctor, he called, made some calls, and they said, hey, we'd like to see you, just check some things out. And he went in the doctor. All this is kind of a blur, but he was going to the doctor, and he wasn't feeling good. And I was working, going like crazy, and my sister's like, she had off. She's like, well, I'll go with mom and dad. I'll drive, and whatever. And we weren't really thinking anything about it. And he got to the doctor, and his doctor told him, said, Steve, you have cancer in your liver. It's extremely aggressive. You're probably looking at 3 to 6 months, 12 months best case scenario with treatment. And we didn't know. There were only 3 that knew. And I got a text from my sister, and she's like, hey, we need you, it's not good. Like, okay. So immediately, phones start going off, text messages start being sent, calls start being made. We all live within, Heather lives in Eastgate, and she's the farthest one away. My kids live within 5 or 6 minutes. We all live right in Bethel. So within a matter of 30, 40 minutes, the whole family was at mom and dad's house. And dad gave us the news. And the part about being that and getting that information from my dad's side was he was a pastor for so long, and he'd been on the other side of that. He knew the outcome. And he told us, he said this, it's aggressive, 12 months best, 3 to 6 months. If I start taking, chemo and this and that, my quality of life, even for those 6 months, is not going to be good. So he said, I've decided to not have any treatment. That if it's his time to go, then it's his time to go. My mom was not a big fan of that. I can't say that I was a fan, but I told my mom I completely understood it, and that would be my decision also. That I would want, if I got 3, cool. If I got 6, cool. But I don't want 12 and it not be cool, not be fun, not just be doctor's appointments and sick and everything else. So we all got on that page. We're good. Me being the oldest and me being the only son, I pretty much just said, all right, we got 3 to 6 months. I went to dad and said, what do you want to do? He said, well, they had a cabin in Gatlinburg for 10 years, vacation home. We all use it all the time. He goes, and he loved the mountains. He goes, I'd like to go to the mountains as a family one more time. I said, okay, I'll make it happen. He goes, and what some of you don't know, probably all of you don't know, the staff knows, Dad was filling in for Jay, and he was supposed to preach the next Sunday. And we came to church, and he was sitting about 10 or 15 seats down here to my right, and he had his outline in his hand. And I knew something was wrong. He was sitting on the end, and Mom and me, and during worship, and Dad loved worship, and it's my favorite part of the service too. Sorry, Jay. You could tell he wasn't feeling good, and he looked at Mom and said, "Hey, I've got to sit down." And he sat down in his pew, and I'd never seen my dad do that. He sat down at church. So he did that, and then I just kept glancing at him while Jay was preaching, and as the sermon got going on, I could see sweat on Dad's face, and he was a little pale, and I could tell he wasn't feeling good. And then at the closing of the service, Dad looked at Mom. He stood up, and Dad looked at Mom. He's like, "Hey, I've got to get out of here. I feel like I'm going to pass out, or something's going to happen, and I don't want to be in the sanctuary and cause a disruption." Of course, he's thinking about everybody else but himself. And he excused himself, and I watched him the whole way. He made it out the door. I actually seen it. He made it to John K. Hall, and him and John, I could tell, went over in the corner. And nobody knew at this point. So Dad was sharing everything with John in the corner, and I came out, and I was talking to Dad, and I'm like, "Dad," because his second request was, I don't know did I say that? His second request was he wanted to preach one more time, and he was supposed to the next week. So I went out to Dad, and I said, "Dad," I said, "I don't want to be this guy. But," I said, "unless something special happens here," I was like, I don't think you can stand up for that long and preach. I said, especially, you got to do it twice back to back. I said, I don't know that you're going to have the strength for that. He looked at me, and he said, "I know." He had already turned the paperwork and what he wanted on the PowerPoint and everything in, and he talked to Jay after that, and he said, "Well, we'll see how you feel in a week or two. If it can still happen, it can still happen." So that happened, and then I got on the phone with my uncle and my aunt, Tom and Betsy, and they have a cabin in Virginia. It's out in the middle of nowhere. It's beautiful. And I said, "Tom," I said, "what are the chances the cabin's open this weekend?" He's like, "What do you mean?" I was like, "Yeah, what's good?" He goes, "It's open." I said, "I'm not asking for Mom and Dad." I said, "I'm asking for the whole clan." I said, "If we can make this happen." He said, "Dude, whatever days you want, it's yours." I said, "Okay." I started texting, calling, and just so happened Junior and Aubrey and the kids were headed to Myrtle Beach. Matt and Abby were headed to Florida, and we had that weekend. And if we didn't hit that weekend, and at this point, we're still thinking, we've got a little bit of time. Me and Chandler were headed on an Alaskan cruise. Jeremy and Rachel were headed to Europe, to Denmark. We're thinking, if all this happens, we can do it. I called my kids. They're like, "Absolutely, we'll go on the way down on our trip." And I said, "Okay, that would work." It worked with Jeremy and Rachel, worked with Heather, blah, blah, blah. Called my Uncle Tom back, said, "Okay, we got it." So I go over to Mom and Dad's house, and I said, "Hey," "I got some news for you." He's like, "What's that?" I was like, I think this was Tuesday. I said, "We're going to the mountains this weekend." He's like, "What?" I said, "We're going to the mountains this weekend." I said, "I can't get you to preach, but I can get you to the mountains." And he said, "Well, who's going?" I said, "Everybody." He said, "Everybody." I said, "Everybody. Rhett, Evie, Junior, Aubrey, Matt, Abby, Heather, Rachel, Jeremy, Mom, you, me, Chandra." So we're all going. He just started crying. Happy tears. So we loaded up, took off. I took off, Rachel took off, and we drove Mom and Dad down. And everybody else was figuring out work. And
And now we got down there, had an incredible weekend of water balloon fights, wiffle ball games, and Dad just kind of sitting on the porch watching everything. And he was already at a point where he was uncomfortable, couldn't sleep, couldn't lay down, but he could make it up the stairs. And in the loft, my uncle has a chair and an ottoman, and that's how Dad was sleeping at home. He was sleeping in his recliner. So when he would get tired at 9:30, 10 o'clock, maybe 10:15, he's like, hey, I'm gonna go up and lay down. And the very first night we were there, this will get you. My granddaughter, Evie Grace, has my dad's heart and his softness and his caring. She's only 6. And she called him Papa Great. She saw Papa Great get up. He's kind of weak, kind of, not unstable, but, slow. And she said, Papa Great, I'll help you. And she grabbed his hand, walked him up the stairs, got him in his chair, got his feet up on his ottoman, got the blanket, made sure his toes were covered, and said, if you need anything, Papa, you ask me. She did that every night, the whole weekend. It was just a very, very special time for our family. Every morning, the 2 mornings we were there, big country breakfast from Chandra and Rachel and Heather, everything. Cracker Barrel didn't have more food than we did, but it was everything that we loved and Dad loved. And the kids took off in their trips, and we were there, and we were coming back home. And we got home from that trip on, I believe, Sunday, and then it was either Monday or Tuesday. Dad said, hey, can you drive? I'm not feeling good. So we called his doctors, and his doctor said, well, Steve, why don't you go to the ER? Let's just go to the emergency room. So we went to them. She goes, I'll be there to check on you, but go in and get checked in, that they can get you comfortable. We're like, okay, just, another hiccup in the process. We got 3 to 6 months. We get there, he's not comfortable, they can't get him comfortable. They come in and do some tests, and in that 2-week time, they did some scans, and now it was in his rib cage, it was in his sternum, it was in his shoulder. His liver was completely engulfed. And the doctors before had said, hey, we got time. There's no rush with hospice. There's no rush with anything. And I can't remember her name, but I can see her. He had an awesome doctor. And she said, Steve, when it's time, I'll let you know. But I want to take care of you until I can't. And she came in and she explained to us how it had spread, where it had gone, that it was very rapidly spreading, and it was a very, very one of the most aggressive forms that she'd ever seen. And it was just me, Mom, and Dad there, and nobody wanted to ask a question while she was in there. So she excused herself, and I told Mom and Dad, I said, hey, give me a minute. And I walked out, and I said, all right. I said, what are we looking at? And she goes, maybe a month. Maybe 2 weeks. She goes, it's very aggressive, Chris. It's not going to be long. And then to go back from the time that they told us it was 3 to 6 months, he lasted 28 days. And from the time we got home from the trip, it was within 3 weeks, he was gone. But in that time, as bad as it was some of the most special times of my life, or of our family's lives. At one point I told Dad, I was like, Dad, I'm not getting something. He's like, what's that? And here he is, He's probably at this point 2 weeks from dying. I said, you know, I'm only supposed to have faith the size of a mustard seed. I can move a mountain. I said, Dad, I know my faith is bigger than a mustard seed. I said, all I'm asking is for God to heal you. I said, it's not happening. I said, so as long as I live my life right, I said, that's going to be my question when I get to heaven. Dad didn't miss a beat. Still my dad. Still my preacher. Still my pastor. He looks at me and he says, well, you know what? Sometimes your faith isn't as big as God's will. He said, your faith can be way bigger than a mustard seed. But if it's not God's will, it doesn't matter. I was like, thanks, Pops. So he was still preaching to me all the way to the end. And very profound words. And it put me at ease because I didn't have to have a question. I didn't have to, you know, and it was Dad his whole life. Hey, I'm always going to do God's will, and God's will be done. He said that's the hardest part of that prayer. But yeah, that 28 days was just boom, 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 all the way down to the end. Oh, everything. We were so close. I can't watch a Bengals game without thinking of Dad. I can't watch the Ohio State football game without thinking of Dad. I can't grill a steak without thinking of my dad. We were big steak guys, and I was the grill guy. We have a camp that all the family goes to on the weekends, and they actually had the camper next to us, so they would camp next to us. And we would have steak night. It would be bring your own steak night, and we would have 16 steaks on that thing, and we're still going there. We skipped a couple weekends after Dad passed away because nobody wanted to be there without him. But literally, I can't do anything. I coming to church. That's all I knew. My dad was church. Some of the songs that the worship team sings, those were songs that my mom and dad sang. Some of the message parts that Jay's preaching, he'll say stuff and I'll be like, heard that before. In closing, grief is a different animal, a different beast, a different emotion. I've never had, I had one grandma, my grandma Joan. She died when she was, in her 70s, but all my other grandparents have been in their 90s. I've never had, a loss of anyone that close to me. So I've never experienced what I'm experiencing now. None of us have. And it's one day you're upset, one day you're angry. I can remember having the conversation with God, like you gave me this awesome dad and you took him from me. And in my eyes, too early. Give me another 10 years, give me another 15 years. It'd been a lot easier if he'd have been 80, 85, 90. But I didn't get that. It's like, it was such a profound reality. God was like, Chris, I gave you 53 years with the best dad you could ever have. And you're wanting 10 or 15 more? I'm like, yeah, I am. But I did get that good 53, and it was extremely, extremely blessed life of mine to have my dad in my life. But the way, a little side story, the way different people grieve differently is, at Dad's house, Dad's got his chair, his recliner. Well, I didn't want to sit there and see that chair empty. It tore my heart out. So I would sit in it on purpose because I didn't want to see it empty. I didn't want to sit on the couch with Chandra and look across the family room and see my dad's chair empty. I would sit in it. I was talking to my mom, and Mom said, Heather hates when you sit in Dad's chair. I was like, what? She's like, that's Dad's chair. That's not Chris's chair. And I was like, you know what? I was like, that's a truth to that. Everybody grieves different. Everybody sees it different. The head of the table, Dad's not there no more when we have family dinner. And to my youngest sister Rachel's credit, we have dinner as a family, all of us, who I've talked about before, at my mom's house. We bring all the food at least every 2 weeks. But the head of the table is not Dad now. It's my mom and my sister Heather sit up there. But it's all the little things now. But
and this is your first like holiday season.
oh yeah, Christmas is going to be rough. Dad always sat down, got the Bible, read the full Christmas story to the whole family. And I know my sisters and my family are going to expect me to do that. And it's going to be really, really tough. But I know that's coming. Thanksgiving's coming. Birthdays are coming. It's just, that stuff's all going to hit different. Father's Day's going to come. That stuff's all going to hit different. And we'll get through it, but it won't be fun. Just last week, I was like, I've been wanting to call his phone because Mom left his phone on, because I wanted to hear his voicemail. But I didn't want to call, and it ring, and Mom see it. Chris, why is Chris calling Dad's phone? So my mom's not a morning person, so I'd got up to go to work, and I was like, Mom's asleep. She's not going to see Dad's phone. So I called it, and I don't know why I was expecting to be, that was awesome. I called it, and, hello, this is Steve Wheeler. Please leave a voicemail. I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly. As soon as I heard the voice, and I got to go to work in like 10 minutes, and I'm a mess. I'm a wreck, and wiped off the tears. But you hear that voice, or you see a picture. You see my little grandson or my little granddaughter, and they know he's in heaven, because that's all been explained to them. But they have this childlike, we'll be sitting there doing something, and Evie will be like, "Papa, great, love that," and we're like, yeah, he would have. We're just not talking about it because we'll just all start bawling. But the only thing that I can't imagine not having a relationship with God and getting through something like this, because it's been the hardest thing that I've ever done in my life. I can't imagine going through it without having a relationship with Christ, and not having prayer, and not having Him answer you. Because one of my biggest things was my prayers was, in 2 or 3 weeks before this, Jay had preached a sermon on, and he talked about fasting. So I was like, all right, I'm praying, I'm fasting, I'm going, 24 hours, I'm going 30 plus hours, and I'm not telling anybody, because, Jay's message was, when you fast, you don't tell nobody about it, you don't brag about it. So I wasn't bragging about it. I wasn't even telling my wife about it. I'd just be like, hey, I'm going to be busy. Let's eat dinner a little later tonight. So I could get to that 30-hour mark. And every time I felt that hunger pain, I was praying for Pops. But I can't imagine going through that and not having a relationship with God, and not having a family that has a relationship with God, and not having a church that absolutely 100% has your back. Like Jay was there, Hud was there, Claire was there. His funeral was absolutely amazing. It was a 2-hour wait. We had it here at the crossing. It was 2 hours to get in the door. Just people from other states, people from everywhere. And my papa, his dad, actually got Mom aside and said, I never realized how many people that Steve affected and how many people loved him. And that was an absolute blessing to our family. And to have the crossing reach out and be the way that they were to me, to my dad, my family. I can't imagine going through what we went through without your church family and without God. I don't know. I don't think I could have got through it. So that's my story.
Thank you for sharing.
You're quite
That's
welcome.
Great.